before I start this video, because as you can see from what's on the screen, what we're going to be watching, already, oh shit, Tucker Carlson has one. Let's do Tucker's instead. I have not covered Tucker Carlson on this show. Before we get into it, let's look at this comment real quick. Banning books today, arresting you for owning them tomorrow. The writing is on the wall. The demo did not put up those fences around the Capitol for nothing. Prepare yourself for martial law. No writing on the wall. Sad to say, but we've been under martial law since Roosevelt. The governor signed the War Powers Act for economic reasons and is still in effect. Thus, executive orders. Yep. No one has banned the books, you illiterate maggot. The publisher is choosing not to publish them anymore. How long have you listened and bought into Tucker's fear-mongering? Every friggin' day for at least 10 years, Carlson says the same thing. They're coming for you, they don't like you, etc. Yet you are still here and nothing has happened. And then you see some random shit like, we should cancel Joe Biden for being the biggest racist in American history. With 35 fucking likes. If they're no longer published, then they will no longer be sold. If you can't buy it, you can't own it. Hence a de facto ban. You can find this shit online! The problem is not even the thing. It is the dissonance in which you think the thing exists. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you, yo? And you read these. If Joe Biden's presidency is this bad, imagine how Kamala would be in 2 years from now. Sorry, I always make that fucking mistake. I came to America not knowing any English when I was 8, and my teacher taught me how by reading Dr. Seuss books. I remember how much I enjoyed them. They were so delightful and made me laugh. I never learned racism from these wonderful books. I will always have a special place in my heart for Dr. Seuss. These people are just looking for hate in everything they touch. But as we covered earlier, this has jack shit to do with political decisions. It is literally the publisher saying there are a few books, not the entire Dr. Seuss fucking library, that we feel do not work in today's worldview. They were made during a specific time in which these hateful comments were allowed and were commonplace speech. So therefore, we are not going to publish them anymore. There are still copies of them out there. No one is going to arrest you for reading the book. No one is going to arrest you for owning the book. Like, if you have a copy of one of these books now, you can make bank because now they're like a fucking collector's edition item. Like, we just talked about NFTs earlier. Like, it's so aggravating. It is so aggravating because I know that nobody watched this fucking video. They read the headline, they know what Tucker's about, so they're just gonna sit on here and type that dumb shit. So if the whole idea of the premise of Dr. Seuss being canceled isn't even real. And I don't mean it's not real like, it's a spin on this, it's a take on this, like some people's takes just went a little bit further than others. It's a rational discussion that went this way with one group and this way with another group. No, this shit is an imaginary sequence, and you have a cable news show syndicated and worldwide, and you say this out loud. That means there are people that are gonna believe in it. So let's see what the fuck Tucker is on when he talks about this shit.
Almost 4 years ago on this show, we talked to a former Georgia state representative called LaDawn Jones about Black Lives Matter. Jones is a strong supporter of BLM, so not surprisingly,
he's a psyop.
she was well
I would
practiced
believe
in
it.
the now highly familiar tactic of denouncing everything she doesn't like as racist, and we knew that going into the interview. What was surprising was to hear LaDawn Jones go after the beloved children's book author, Dr. Seuss. She called Dr. Seuss a bigot. Here's the exchange from 2017.
I actually had to, once I heard the story, pull out our Dr. Seuss books that are on my children's bookshelf and take a closer look at them so I can see exactly what it was that was the complaint. And as is normal for many of us.
What was it? I mean, actually, I've been obviously speaking tongue-in-cheek because this is, like, literally demented. But since you said that you checked Dr. Seuss for racism, what did you find? Where were the racist...
The fucking hyperbolic... What did I just say? Setting the question up with the entire premise that whatever you say next is going to be ludicrous.
Parts.
So you look at many of the drawings, and you have to put it in the context of the times that many of these books were written. And you can see that there are some very stereotypical drawings of Asian Americans. Dr. Seuss was known for some very stereotypical blackface drawings prior to the books that most of us are familiar with.
Oh, why'd you cut it off there? Thank you. Now, he should immediately say right now, oh, he's talking about these specific things, like, you know, hang a dead N-word on that, like this, that, and the other, blah, 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 like that, whatnot. And she just explained to you what we found that made the publishers decide not to publish the books anymore.
Now, at the time, what you just heard seemed incomprehensible. In fact, as we noted, kind of demented. Say what you will about Dr. Seuss. Maybe you think his drawings are primitive. Maybe some of his doggerel doesn't actually rhyme. Fair. But Dr. Seuss was not a racist.
Holy shit! That's not the point that was made. And people swallow this shit up. This is content. Thank you, Tucker. I needed content today.
Dr. Seuss was a preachy liberal. He was an evangelist against bigotry. He wrote an entire shelf of books against racism, and not in a subtle way. They were clearly, explicitly against racism. That was the whole point of writing them, to teach children not to be racist. Now, as it happens, today is Dr. Seuss's birthday. Born Ted Geisel in Springfield, Massachusetts, he would be 117 years old were he alive today. And thank God he isn't, because he would be wounded and confused. Every year on Dr. Seuss's birthday, the president, whomever he is at the time, makes a proclamation in support of something called Read Across America Day. That's designed to encourage kids to read books. And every year, the president mentions Dr. Seuss, because, again, it's his birthday. That's the whole point of it. But not this year. Joe Biden omitted Dr. Seuss from this year's proclamation. Why? Because Dr. Seuss is now considered a racist.
Wrong! Oh, this is fine. The problem with why I'm even deciding to go from here instead of the Ben Shapiro one is because this is such a bad faith argument. Now, I know he's an opinion piece guy. Like, he's not spitting facts. This is just his, like, he's a fucking React Andy. Like, he's one of us. He should Twitch stream. Like, I honestly think he should stop this and just Twitch stream, because he could get live comments telling him he's a piece of shit to his face. But that's not what people are saying. People are saying that his books, his thoughts when it came to those specific books, had racial undertones that were very, very, very out there type shit. Nobody's calling him a fucking race. Oh my God. We're still reading Dr. Seuss books, just not those 6 books. I can stop talking about this now, but I need it. I need to keep
So
going.
what seemed like total lunacy less than 4 years ago is now the official position of the White House. Now, the shocking thing about this is not that it happened. Academic revolutionaries have been attacking traditional children's books for decades. A few years ago, some moron at Boston University produced so-called research on Curious George's undercurrent of white dominance. Quote, the series' celebration of the oppression of an abducted monkey parallels the oppression of black Americans.
All right, before we go forward, my Curious George's undercurrent of... Okay, this is an essay. Not gonna read it. While the series' utilization of positive racist imagery can be scrutinized and cataloged, have been by scholars such as Cummins, the repetition of certain behaviors and plot points within the individual books validate the oppressive and demeaning practices they reference and encourages their corporation within civilized society. During the time, media outlets such as blackface and the caricature of the barbaric, uncivilized African native, capitalizing on the supposed humor that could be derived from the humiliation and dehumanization of blacks, with traditions placing blacks on display, attaining persistent popularity in American indigenous times. Tarzan the Man-Ape, Kids in Africa, yeah, we had this conversation, popularized the jungle craze in the 1930s, and Western comics, blah, blah, blah. These influences present themselves throughout the series, especially given the presentation of George's story in a cartoon-like style, his yearnings for Africa, and the man's constant push to display the monkey's life to an audience. A curious George takes a job. After his broken leg is healed in the hospital, George decides to investigate a big blue bottle of ether and the debilitating effects debilitating effects of the drug are shown in a set of panels. The panels, alluding specifically to the comic genre, display a loopy George with large eyes, wandering about until he eventually falls on the floor in a deep sleep. A sequence that uses stereotyped physical comedy western like Tintin in the Congo. George fails to understand the bottle contains ether despite its label because of his inability to read, and his inhaling of the drug renders him useless and dysfunctional the same way that broken English and incompetence. Okay, this is a little bit of a reach, but I see where it's going if we're talking. Yeah, I figured that this was a part of a bigger issue. Yeah, this is an essay that stems from a bunch of essays. Yeah, this is about analyzing literature culture. Comments. The fact that there's an entire essay analyzing Curious George as proof of leftist mental illness, though, that's dumb, because that's a shit take. Matter of fact, that's a super shit take, because then any analyzation of literature, like, what is Lord of the Flies then? Social commentary on humanity structure, or the power structure and the reason why, like, see that, that's a shit take. That's academia. You have to analyze every text. It's easy to say Curious George has nothing to do with racism because you read it as a kid and you didn't take in those values and points. But the times that it was written in, and this is not talking about the Curious George as we know him. They're talking about this Curious George. Like, there's a difference. There's a highly different Curious George that you're thinking about. No, that's a shit take. But this is also a shit take, because that's specifically picking out a sentence that doesn't apply to the theory of what it's talking about. And it's also talking about old. I just said that, Curious George. Sorry, I'm repeating myself because that was a real shit take. I'm sorry. That's not a leftist thing. That academia. That's another thing. Like, okay, since you're here, why are these things leftist ideals? Because a right-winger, like, brought it up? That's literal academia, studying texts and finding underlying tones based on time, place, and societal conditions. That's just the thing historians and literature, like, experts do. There's a word for that. What the fuck am I looking for? Sorry, I can't think about the exact job description, job title. But that's a thing people do. Like, you have to analyze these texts. People have done it with the Bible. Like, and you end up finding a lot of racial, like, structures under there. Lord of the Flies again. Why were two white boys picked out to be the top of the crop? Like, why? Like, these things you can look at from different perspectives without it being a right or left thing. It's about how society views people and what texts reinforce that idea. Because you might say, I would never find racial imagery in a Curious George book, but the writer wrote that with that as an underlying tone for why anything was happening in the first place. Now, this could unravel into a conversation about, well, why don't you just look at every book and say, could you find racial undertones in there? You wouldn't have to do that. You could look at societal structure instead, and then from there, you would say, okay, well, this story has nothing to do with white versus black, but during the time that it was written, there was a constant, like, grasp for power between these two groups. One is marginalized in a larger society, so the author would not have thought to include black people in this story because that wouldn't have been a thing that they would have been able to do anyway. That's the type of analyzation that essay is talking about. It has nothing to do with left versus right. And if you continue to put things in these boxes, you're going to end up with a lot of people saying the left wants to cancel everything, while, like, fucking conservative historians literally are doing the exact same thing with other texts and finding more racial bigotry and more, like, undertones within those texts, and nobody says anything about it. So, yeah, that's a shit take.
And so on. You won't be surprised to learn that girl now works for Bill de Blasio in New York. Of course she does.
I knew he was going to say it.
What's surprising is how calculated all this is.
Oh, it's calculated. I can't wait for the reason why you think it's calculated.
Now, conservatives will be tempted to chalk up the attacks on Dr. Seuss to the usual cancel culture gone mad. Look how hysterical and stupid the professional left is. They're even calling Dr. Seuss racist. And you've seen people say that on social media today. But it's totally missing the point. Canceling Dr. Seuss isn't stupid, it's intentional. They're banning Dr. Seuss not because he was a racist, but precisely because he wasn't.
I gotta unpack that.
In 1961, Dr. Seuss wrote a story called The Sneetches. Martin Luther King's March on Washington was still 2 years away, but Dr.
Why do you keep skipping the 6 books?
Seuss's story captured its essence. In case you haven't already read it to your kids 50 times and know it by heart, here's the plot. There's a group of furry, pear-shaped animals called Sneetches who live on what looks like a faraway planet. Now, if that sounds weird to you, be aware that Dr. Seuss rarely drew people, probably because he didn't want to elevate one kind of person over any other kind of person. He wasn't a racist. In any case, there are 2 groups of Sneetches in the story, those with star-shaped designs on their stomachs and those without. There's no real difference between the 2 groups, but the Sneetches don't know that. They're convinced that stars are all important. So they spend the entire story jockeying for position based on the relative starness. At various points in the story, stars on the stomach are deemed socially favorable. At others, they're considered a mark of disgrace. And the Sneetches run around frantically trying to keep up with the changing demands of star fashion, until they realize, in the uplifting final pages of the story, that none of it matters. Underneath the stars, they're all the same. They're all Sneetches. Who cares who's got a star? What matters isn't the group you come from. What matters is you. Even a 5-year-old gets the point of the story. At the deepest level, it doesn't matter.
Even a 5-year-old gets the point of this story. I understand he's being hyperbolic for the sake of being hyperbolic, but like, no, a 5-year-old would not get the point of that story. They would need it explained to them! Which is why we have library in elementary school. I'm banging my head. A 5-year-old.
Matter what we look like, because
5-year-old could read that. Absolutely.
Underneath
It's not something that somebody needed to be read. It's not a book that needs to be read to them and then explained to them.
all the same. We're all human beings. We're in this together. All that outward appearance stuff is pointless. It just makes people hate each other, and it makes us look ridiculous. If there's a more powerful statement on the universal brotherhood of man, it's probably not in the children's section of the bookstore. For 60 years, American children have read the Sneetches and books like it.
I never read this shit. I never even heard of this book.
And that's one of the reasons we have the country we have today, in which most Americans, those who don't work at the universities or for the Joe Biden administration, accept Martin Luther King's most famous precept, that what matters is the content of our characters, not the color of our skins. The Sneetches affirm this. The story is a plea for colorblindness, and that's why the forces of wokeness hate it, and Dr. Seuss. When the people in charge cancel Dr. Seuss, what they're really trying to eliminate is a very specific kind of mid-century American culture, a culture that championed meritocracy and colorblindness and the superiority of individual achievement over tribal identity. These were once called liberal values. Modern liberals don't want to be reminded that they once believed any of this. If your kids are allowed to read Dr. Seuss, they will know this was a different country not so long ago, a place where people tried hard not to hate each other.
Then what the fuck was the Civil Rights Act?
A place where the population
Then why did Martin Luther King get assassinated? Too many questions. Too many questions.
Was encouraged, begged by its leaders to reject identity politics in favor of universal values and the things that connect us all.
Like universal health care?
Dr. Seuss was never a major literary figure, but his memory matters more than a literary figure in favor of values and the things that connect us all. Dr. Seuss was never a major literary figure.
But you've literally talked about him as though he was the cornerstone of fighting against racism with his books that children still read today. So if he was never a major literary figure, then what the fuck does it matter?
But his memory matters more than it ever has. The battle over Dr. Seuss, what he stood for.
The battle over Dr. Seuss. I can't wait for the publishing company to come out with like a defamation suit against this shit.
Battle over what it means to be racist will have consequences that extend for generations. And if we lose that battle, America is lost.
Oh my God, if you cancel Dr. Seuss, America is gone. Oh my God.